Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This episode of True Murder is brought to you by Audible, the world's leading name in digital audiobooks. If you visit audiblepodcast.com/truemurder, right now you can get a free 30-day trial and a free audiobook of your choice. That's audiblepodcast.com/truemurder. After his December 2003 arrest, registered nurse Charlie Cullen was quickly dubbed the Angel of Death by the media. But Cullen was no mercy killer, nor was he a simple monster. He was a favorite son, husband, beloved father, best friend, and celebrated caregiver. Implicated in the deaths of as many as 300 patients, he was also perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history. Cullen's murderous career in the world's most trusted profession spanned 16 years and 9 hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. When in March of 2006, Charles Cullen was marched from his final sentencing in an Allentown, Pennsylvania courthouse into a waiting police van, it seemed certain that the chilling secrets of his life, career, and capture would disappear with him. Now, in a riveting piece of investigative journalism, nearly 10 years in the making, journalist Charles Graeber presents the whole story for the first time. Based on hundreds of pages of previously unseen police records, interviews, wiretap recordings, and videotapes, as well as exclusive jailhouse conversations with Cullen himself and the confidential informant who helped bring him down, The Good Nurse weaves an urgent, terrifying tale of murder, friendship, and betrayal. Were it not for the hard-boiled, unrelenting work of 2 former Newark homicide detectives racing to put together the pieces of Cullen's professional past, and a fellow nurse willing to put everything at risk, including her job and the safety of her children, there's no telling how many more lives could have been lost. The book that we're featuring this evening is The Good Nurse, a true story of medicine, madness, and murder, with my special guest journalist and author, Charles Graeber. Welcome to the program, and thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, Charles Graeber.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Very interesting story, and again, even though we've done this for 5 years, this is a completely different take on murder. Definitely, absolutely. Let's get to one of my favorite questions. What specifically brought you to this? Why, of all the stories you could have picked, why were you compelled to write this book, The Good Nurse?
That's a great question, and it's kind of a long answer. So I'm glad you've got a solid block of time for your program. Hopefully it actually doesn't peter out informationally. It wasn't my intention to write. I didn't walk into this story and the information that led up to this story thinking I was writing a book. I started with a newspaper article. Like anybody else, I'm looking through the paper, and I've got an eye out for especially crime items, obviously, and especially freaky ones. And I believe the headline, if it didn't say this exactly, it certainly it was something like it was Angel of Death serial killer attempts to donate kidney from jail, and I'd never seen that combination of words anywhere, obviously before, and it was a small piece. It was maybe a 2-inch column, and it was a story about a guy they were calling the Angel of Death, who was attempting to donate a kidney, as I said, from jail and was being stopped from doing so because, as one might imagine, he that didn't fit. It was something he wanted to do, and him doing what he wanted to do from, at that point, jail, because he hadn't been sentenced, really didn't fit many people's idea of punishment. So he was being stopped from doing that, even though there was somebody that was actually going to most probably die without that kidney. So this is a hugely ironic and kind of crazy situation, and I just thought it caught my eye, and I put it in my wallet for whatever reason. And then I was having a lunch with a magazine editor that I just finished a piece with about something else, and he said, "Isn't there anything else you want to do for us?" And I really didn't want to do anything else for them, but he said, "Isn't there anything that's keeping you up nights, sort of?" And I said, "Well, I've got this thing," and I pulled out my wallet, and I had this, this one cut out piece. And the thing about it at that point, Charlie Cullen had been arrested. He was arrested on December 12th of 2003 when he was leaving a restaurant in New Jersey, and he at that point it was accused of one murder and one attempted murder. He'd already been fired from his last nursing position, and he at that point he really refused to speak, and then eventually he did speak, and it turns out that what they were accusing him of was really on the tip of the iceberg. But and he sang a song that included some 40 people. We know that to be probably wrong by a factor of 10 at this point. But what we'd heard of a story of Charlie Cullen was about maybe a mercy killer, certainly a guy who wasn't going to say anything else. He'd spoken to the cops once, he'd spoken to the detectives, he wasn't going to address anyone else. He'd never addressed the press, he never addressed the families of the victims, he wouldn't speak in court except to say, yes, Your Honor, and he planned to go away like that. And so there was no way he was ever going to speak to me. But I gave it a shot, and he responded to my letter, mostly because I think I told him it was sort of up to him whether or not he wanted he was willing to put a little bit of himself on the line in order to donate that kidney, because I thought actually donating the kidney was a good thing, and I told him there's stuff he did, good and bad, and I'm just here to try and talk about what happened, not to judge you. I'm not your ethical accountant. So just if you want to talk to me, you'll talk to me, and you'll maybe get that thing done. And if you don't, good luck to you. And he got back. And once I started talking to him, I started meeting with him, and his lawyer couldn't believe he was talking to me because he wasn't talking to anybody. And I started meeting with him in the Somerville jail in Somerset County, New Jersey, where he was being held. And once I started speaking with him, I was also speaking with his priest and his lawyer, and in those conversations, a very different picture emerged. It was very different from this angel of death, angel of mercy kind of character. It's very different from a picture of a guy who had operated for 16 years at 9 different hospitals and a nursing home without being detected at all, and then suddenly the system that was designed to catch him caught him, and justice was served and a monster was put away. What I discovered was something much more complicated. First, I discovered that the serial killer himself, Charlie Cullen, was more charming than you might think, but not charming in a Bundy sense, just sort of someone that you didn't automatically dismiss. He actually had a lot of complexity. He was a smart guy, and he wasn't smug. At least he didn't come off that way. And I also learned that, as you know from reading the book, that the big surprise wasn't, the question I get asked all the time is, why wasn't Charlie Cullen caught sooner? And the shocking answer turned out to be he was, over and over again. and somehow he kept on getting let go, passed on, however you might want to put it. And he had a remarkable perspective on that. He found it, I guess you'd say, funny. And when I realized that, I realized there's a story here that needs telling, and it was a complicated story. It involved drug names and the chemistry of the human body and a lot of psychology and some character. There are no explosions, there are no knives, there's no blood, not in that sense. And yet it's the most grisly story I could imagine. And it was going to take some subtle telling. And luckily, happily I got the. Once I was talking to Cullen, and I was the one guy that could maybe carry that weight, even though I had to keep it secret for a long time. It became known to other people, including the detectives who caught him and some confidential informants, and gradually people came out of the woodwork. But the more people that came out, the more complicated it got, which is why ultimately this story took 8 years to tell it fully. So that's how that whole thing got. But if I'd known, I'm really glad to have been able to tell this story and be able to write it out like I did, and I've been pleased with the reaction to it, and it was good to get it out of my system, if you will, and get it into the world. But I never would have guessed in that moment when that first letter came sliding underneath my door that 8 years later I'd still be neck deep in it, if not deeper.
Sure. Let's go back to Charles Cullen, because you've got the audience. Certainly the interest has been piqued in terms of what has happened, but we are just going to touch on how on earth this could have happened for 16 years and how a character like Charles Cullen almost got away for who knows how many more years and how many deaths. And you go into great detail. You really do capture the detail of some of these horrible deaths. So we're not talking about an angel of mercy. An angel of death sort of sounds like that, like some benevolence somewhere involved here. And we're talking about ill people, but we're not talking about that at all. So let's go back to, again, a lot of people want to know how on earth some of these people are shaped and what could have contributed, not really to blame, but contributed to how they end up and in these particular situations. So tell us about the background of Charles Cullen, where he grew up, and how he got to be a nurse. And we're talking about quite a few years ago, where a male nurse was not something very common, was it? So tell us a little bit about Charles Cullen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the form. I'm a fan of the genre. I'm a fan of serial killer stories of all stripes. But this is the first serial killer I've actually known personally. The first one I worked with, and luckily I put in some time with it. But some of it fit the mold, and a lot of it broke it for me. In that, I'll describe the background. I'll describe how it all came to be, and you can see in the book as you read it, you can sort of see the pieces lining up. You can understand the pathology come together. You can see patterns forming in the guy's head and how they start to perhaps manifest in his crimes, in his murders. But it's not a clean equation. It's not like this plus this equals automatically a serial killer. There's a real mystery to it. So I'll just describe what we know. Charlie Cullen was born in East Orange, New Jersey. He was born in 1960. He was a late life baby for his parents. He was, I guess you call him a mistake, really. They hadn't planned on having a kid. Everyone else was older by decades. The other 9 children. It was, they were a family that worked and got by, except his father died when he was just a few months old, and so that became harder and harder. Some of those older kids were into some rough stuff, and they were, it seems, dealing out of the house, doing drugs out of the house, bringing people around, and that was a old wooden house that I think was filled with a lot of a lot of hurt and a lot of strangeness for Charlie Cullen. That's a hard thing for him to talk about. Our interviews were anything but a confessional. I got what I could get, and I had to investigate the rest. And he shuts down on certain stuff. And this is the part where absolutely it's as dark going through his memories as it would through an unlit 3-story house. So there are some dark corridors in there that even he can't walk into anymore. But when his mother died in a car accident when he was 17 years old, it was in 1977. It was. He learned about it. He used to play sick. He used to call in sick to school quite a bit, and he was very, very much attached to his mother, and he enjoyed that time that he got to spend with her, especially. And she protected him from the chaos of those rooms upstairs, and the older boys and the people that came around to see the older daughters and took them away sometimes, and then brought them back with black eyes. And he depended on his mother in that way, and enjoyed being sick, I suppose, in that way. And one of his sisters took his mom out to get some errands done, and never came back. And the police came around to tell him that there'd been an accident. They didn't tell him that his sister hadn't taken her medication and had an epileptic seizure at the wheel, and they didn't tell Charlie that his mother was dead. And he went to that hospital and discovered that not only was his mother dead, but they told him her body was gone. He never saw her again, and he was very bitter about that. That's something he cannot speak about at all. And he held that forever. Now, just to I'm going to break the chronology here, but a fascinating thing for me, I spoke to Charlie Cullen dozens of times in jail, during his sentencing, and later when he was in maximum security lockup in Trenton as a non-com, and with the guys that are going to get killed by everybody else if they come out of their cell. And he wouldn't ever speak about this part of things. But one thing that did come out during our discussions was a different version of the events that I'm about to tell you, and so I just want to highlight that as we go through, because when his mother died, it was one of the first times he attempted suicide. It was actually the second, the first being when he was 8 years old, at least what he said so, when he drank the contents of a chemistry set that he'd gotten for Christmas. It was part of the church charity box, because the Cullens at that point were getting by on a lot of the kinds of strangers and fellow church members after his father died. But that was self-reported, so it's impossible to say for sure. But suicide didn't work. But instead, he chose the Navy, and I think the Navy appealed to him at first, but was really a bad fit. He was a smart guy. He got along very well in school, but and applied and trained to be a missile technician. But once he got into the subs themselves, it was like the locker room from hell. He was just trapped in with a bunch of guys. He was a guy that really liked hanging out with his sisters and being protected by women, and here he was with exactly the opposite. And he didn't want to be in front of other guys. He didn't want to be in front. It was a situation that didn't work for him at all, and he developed a drinking habit at that point. He demonstrated a clear issue with authority at that point, and he tried to get himself out of that situation repeatedly by different types of suicide ideations and the like. He finally got out. Now here's the part where the stories diverge. This is a true story. So I needed this. I wanted to tell it like a thriller. I wanted to be able to rip through it and understand the details and really feel them and smell them, use every tool that a novelist gets to use, but I wanted it to be rooted absolutely in the greatest journalism that just irrefutable truth as I was able to access. So I had to be very careful, because there's some things that you'd like to paint in these stories, and you can't, because you can't really confirm them properly. So, and I solved that partially by sometimes explaining what Charlie said and what Charlie thought, because I knew what he thought, because it come from him, and then I had to make a little differentiation between what I knew the absolute truth to be. Charlie Cullen told me how he got into nursing, and he told me it was because during these times of trouble in the submarine, when he really didn't have another friend, he spent a lot of time in two places: in the sick bay, where he liked to help out, giving injections and being useful and seen as valuable, and also with the chaplain. He spent a lot of time with the Catholic chaplain there. He had a Catholic background, and the chaplain told him, that he thought he would do well in maybe taking some courses on. I knew it. I didn't charge that thing properly. Gabrielle?
Well, we seem to have an interruption here. Apparently, he has contacted us via Skype. I'm not sure if that's exactly what's going on, but we wait for his reconnection. We're talking with Charles Graeber, author of The Good Nurse. We'll have this break. I can talk about Audible. Right now, they have the 30-day free trial, like I mentioned. Okay, they have the 30-day free trial, and if you can pick the book of your choice, the audio book of your choice right now for free in the 30-day free trial, and pick one of those books of your choice. One of those books that be very interesting as an audio book is Helter Skelter, the #1 true crime book of all time, 7 million copies. The prosecutor in the famous case against the Charles Manson and his family of followers, in the most famous case of all time, no doubt. Here we have Charles Graeber again. We'll reconnect. But that's Helter Skelter, audiobook. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor in that case. And you can go to audiblepodcast.com/truemurder. Here we will reconnect with Charles Graeber. Good evening, Charles.
Hi, Dan. Good evening. So sorry to have lost you. I told you I was going to have some technical difficulties here. I apologize for that.
No problem. We understand it's weather related. So
no, it's actually it's crazy here. Yeah. So just picking up where we were at. Should I just jump right in?
Sure. Where you last left off, talking about Charles and his again new affinity for medicine, and so we're at that point where he's gotten some advice from this chaplain, and
right.
Tell us.
Exactly. The chaplain at this point is telling him, look, I've seen that you're very useful, and in the medical ward that you actually enjoy it. Why don't you? And this is Charlie telling me all this. Why don't you send away for some correspondence courses? And Charlie did. He did very well with them. He enjoyed them, and so we sent away for some more. And this is where the stories differ. And when I heard this story, it was remarkable to me, and it taught me so much. I had a hard time putting it in the book, except in the end notes, because I wanted to be very careful of reflecting the verifiable truth. What Charlie told me was that when he got out of the Navy, when he was finally discharged from the Navy, he discovered that last correspondence course that he'd sent away for, turns out it wasn't actually another course; it was an application. And he'd been accepted to nursing school, and this was a sign from God. This was fate showing him the path forward. And in a way, it's very similar to a lot of his thinking, which is to say, it wasn't it's ultimately not his responsibility that he did what he did, that he was involved with what he was involved with. A priest and happenstance, and that might equal divine providence actually put him on the path to, frankly, becoming a serial killer. Interestingly enough, what he didn't tell me, which conflicts with this somewhat, is that I discovered that hospital that I'd spoken about earlier, where they'd taken his mother away, and where he'd never seen her again, and where he decided you could never trust hospitals again, and that he had developed a certain attitude towards what part of the world owed him one. That hospital was exactly where he went to nursing school. That was Mountainside, and that wasn't coincidence. That wasn't providence, and that wasn't a place that actually had even had a correspondence course at that point. So that was, I thought, a remarkable thing, that Charlie Cullen went to the place where his mother's body disappeared, a place where he held hospitals responsible for taking away the thing that was protecting him from the world and that he held most dear. And that's where he trained to be actually a rather good nurse, and ultimately a really proficient serial killer. But at that point, as you say, there weren't many male nurses. He was, as a result, a natural choice to be the president of his class, and was the president of his class, much celebrated. And he loved the attention that they gave him. That was a highlight moment for him. He worked his way through nursing school with a series of odd jobs at sort of Quickie Marts and Caldors and Roy Rogers and the like. Met a young woman, and they married and put down some money on a house, and he got a offer for a position in the St. Barnabas Burn Service in Livingston, New Jersey, and with a good hourly rate. And he graduated, and they cut their honeymoon short to make sure that he could start on time on St. Barnabas Day. And it looked like they had a life together, and certainly his wife seemed happy. But he started killing people almost right away.
Now, how is it, you really go into great detail, and it is very, very necessary that you explain the culture, the hospital culture, and which also includes the administration, because we go into how they get their wagons in a circle at some point, and so there's all these divergent interests, we'll say. But tell us about the hospital itself and his role as a nurse and administering drugs, and tell us about, again, start off with some of the terminology, again, coding and code, and tell us how Charles or any nurse has access to the drugs and how that all works.
Yeah, absolutely. So Charlie starts calling. I'm sorry, using my own name. Sometimes Charlie Cullen and Charlie Graeber get mixed up, not just in the process of 8 years of writing about it, but also in the telling. That's Charlie Cullen started in 1987, St. Barnabas Medical Center. His first job there was in the burn service, which is a really particularly gruesome job. But over the course of the next 16 years, he worked all manner of shift and all manner of wards. He had all sorts of all the right qualifications to work pretty much anywhere, and he was in fact a valued veteran, experienced nurse. That earned good money and could, in theory, do good work. His job differed from ward to ward, whether it was the intensive care unit or the burn unit or the cardiac care unit or any of the others. But to describe it in the most general terms, there were certain rituals of care that need to be given once in the beginning of shift, and then throughout, in terms of checking on a patient, checking charts, bathing them, and the like. There is a schedule of drugs that they're supposed to receive, and there's a whole ritual around that. And then there's sort of your worst case scenario, which happens with greater frequency on the wards where people are the most fragile. Burn units are particularly fragile. CCU units, somewhat. ICU, intensive care, by virtue of the name, it is intense, and that is the code. If you're ever in a hospital, and I hope in fact, and we all are. Most of us are born there. Many of us will probably die there, and we have a lot of moments there in between. These are really important places, watershed moment places. They have announcements over the loudspeaker that you hear, and they rarely say, "Everyone quickly run to room 213. There's something terrible happening." What you hear instead is something a lot more calm. Something like, Dr. Quick, please report to room 213, or a Dr. Blue, or these are various codes, and code blue essentially means that a patient has arrested, and measures need to be taken to bring that patient. The heart stopped, the life process is stopped, and measures need to be taken fairly quickly to bring that patient back. Now, people that really enjoy those codes, and those codes are many things, but in working in this book, I hope you'll excuse what may come across as a gallows sensibility, but one of the things they can be is, if you're working there, is exciting. Doesn't mean it's good. It's like the way a fire is exciting to a firefighter, right? It's kind of what you're there for. It's the moment of action. And people that seem to live too much for that excitement, they sometimes call them code freaks. The nurses that worked with him didn't consider Charlie to be, quote, a code freak, but at the same time, he was particularly good at the codes. He would go in with what's called a crash cart, which was the cart of all sorts of medications that might be used to stimulate the heart, or raise or lower blood pressure, or the like, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and things of this nature, and so that they were in ready access. And he seemed to know, even before the residents did or anyone else that was responding to these codes, what the patient might need in order to be quickly brought back in many cases. Now, it was in most cases because he himself had brought about that code. So Charlie Cullen, who worked through poisons, he killed people by delivering overdoses of therapeutic drugs that are usually used therapeutically, like digoxin or Dig, right? Which is a heart medication. It usually regulates blood pressure. He would take these drugs and use them in excess, sometimes for people that weren't prescribed them at all, or excess for people that were prescribed them, and sometimes in concert with other drugs as a sort of cocktail or a sort of symphony, so that a whole range of effects would be going on through the body. It would be very difficult for someone else to decode, but as Charlie Cullen came in the room and responded vigorously to this code, he could, in that moment, perhaps revive the patient, but also seem very smart indeed. But that wasn't his only MO as he went. Those are the patients he saved. we have a record of many more he didn't. But that was his basic story of what he did with some of the patients. Now, those are people he also wanted to see and wanted to be involved with. There's another range of people that for whom he acted. He delivered a dose of medication and then left his shift and left someone else essentially to take responsibility for it. It was a way of covering his tracks. There's a whole other group, and this really dispels, as you said, any sensibility that that Charlie Cullen was a mercy killer. Whatever one might think of what mercy killer means and any merit to that, it's really the first thing I always hear about this. Oh, that guy who's a mercy killer. Then they mention Kevorkian. This had nothing to do with the will of patients. Nobody asked him to do this. It was all about Charlie Cullen, not about anyone else. We're all terminal, frankly. and the people in hospitals are far more fragile. Some of them may be on a faster track to that terminality than others, but that's not really the way he operated. If you like killing people and you don't want to, and you'd like to continue doing it, a hospital is a wonderful place to work, and that's the way Charlie Cullen treated it. And that's clear really right from the onset in his first job, 1987. He's in the burn unit at St. Barnabas for 5 years. And during that time, he's spiking bags of saline in the storm, which is to say the IV bags. They're just basically salt water to increase your blood pressure. The best way to think of it, he's taking those bags that are supposed to be completely benign, and you can add something to them, but mostly it's just to keep your blood pressure going. And he's secretly injecting them with insulin. He's creating a diabetic situation for people that think that they're just getting, a benign bag of saline, and he doesn't know where they're going to go out. So right from the beginning, he's not a mercy killer. Right from the beginning, he's killing people essentially at random, and demonstrating his control. So I'd say that was his basic MO. I mean, it changed. What was one of the most interesting things about this is I really got into the nuance of what he did. And as we speak, by the way, I'm looking at a massive spreadsheet that I've created. I mean, it's like a hand-drawn thing that goes through all the years, and it's covered with 8 years worth of notes and arrows and so forth. And as I learned more and more about this, as I'm sure your listeners might imagine, as you might imagine, you see patterns where you hadn't seen patterns before. You realize you recognize that things start to connect up. You start to put yourself more and more in the mind of the killer, frankly. And as that happened, it actually the crime multiplies. It becomes less of a statistical thing or a numbers thing, and you just realize exactly how insidious it is. At the same time, you can also appreciate perhaps some of what the killer himself appreciated, which is to say that there is a mounting complexity to what he did that it just in terms of a game was actually quite clever. So the exact MO of how he went about getting his drugs, exactly how he went about delivering them, and the effect upon the people. I mean, the ultimate effect, of course, for everyone was terminal. But the means to that end is so much more complicated by the end of his murderous career than it was at the beginning. It's almost as if he started off, sort of garage band playing bass, and he ends up as creating full symphonies by the very end. And I don't mean to suggest any beauty in any of that, but only complexity. So it's I don't want to overwhelm the answer with that complexity, but that is the arc for him.
Now, Charles, what I'm going to do is take just a short break here to talk about Audible and the offer that they have this month, and to talk about 3 fine audiobooks, and then we'll get right back to our story and introduce a couple other characters in this that are just crucial, a couple like we talked about in the introduction about the hardboiled detectives. And in that vein, the Audible this month is a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook of your choice. And some of the fine books that they have with an excellent narrator named Scott Brick is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, of course, the true crime classic, 1965. And then in 1969, Helter Skelter, Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor in that case, prosecuting right from the very beginning, investigating and prosecuting the case against the Charles Manson and his followers for the Tate LaBianca murders, of course, one of the trials of the century, and the #1 best-selling true crime book of all time. And it's available in audiobook with the fabulous Scott Brick narrating. Scott Brick also narrates Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. And another fine offering from Audible is Life After Death by Damien Echols. And Damien was part of the West Memphis Three that spent 18 years on death row falsely accused of murdering 3 boys. He and his friends were eventually exonerated in 2011, but the book chronicles his journey from the accusation to his eventual release from prison. The book is a few years old, has fabulous reviews on the Audible site, and quite uniquely is narrated by Damien Echols himself. So that's Life After Death, Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi and Kurt Gentry, and of course the classic In Cold Blood, Truman Capote. And right now, if you go to audiblepodcast.com/truemurder, 30-day free trial and a free audiobook of your choosing. So audiblepodcast.com/Dan Sapansky. So, Charles, getting back to this incredible case, what I wanted you to express to the audience is really what I found really the most shocking, and I think we alluded to this as well, is that the system, and again, I talked about it, the culture, the administration, and we're going to get to that because there is this resistance, and maybe you can explain how on earth there could have been people that suspected Charles Cullen of actually killing people or spiking them, that it was no accident, that these things racked up, that these things made sense and fingers were pointed towards him, and yet he continually was able to get jobs despite those suspicions, despite those deaths, and easily got jobs and had recommendations. You really go into in this book how that's possible, and that's, I think, one of the scariest aspects of this story and this book.
Yeah, you nailed it there. That's first of all, that's what took 8 years. Talking about one creep doing bad stuff doesn't really take that long. if that's what I was going to be doing, the reason this became a book and the reason this became an obsession and the book it became for me was because everyone had gotten it wrong. When the killer wasn't going to speak, the hospitals at which the killer had worked were issuing some press statements, but they weren't really talking much, and mostly it was self-congratulatory. We caught him, great. The families of the victims were locked up in lawsuits, and then ultimately, locked up in the terms of those suits, which is to say, you want the money, you don't talk. And the ultimate witnesses, of course, are silent because they're dead. And the detectives who caught this guy in the end, the ones that were successful in bringing this thing through and stopping him, they were silenced by a series of forces as well, and they were also very frustrated, frankly. So you weren't hearing from many of those guys. And I waded into the middle of this thinking, wow, this is a loser. This is going to be hard to how do I begin to tell this story? But as I started to accumulate the pieces and started to realize the truth and speak truth to the people that knew it already and knew it better than I at that point, I found eager listeners and eager participants, and gradually they joined me in in giving me access to stuff I'm sure I shouldn't have access to, and that was really, really thrilling. And the picture that emerged, the story that I wouldn't have guessed at going into this, wasn't the story of one bad guy with bad ideas in his head that got put away, and everything's fine and the bad guy's gone. It was a story of all of us. It was a story of a system that we depend upon, and I say system, but I mean a system of people, a series of people that we depend upon to take care of our most vulnerable people, our mothers and daughters and grandmothers and children and everybody else, the hospital administration as a whole. And it really this really touches obviously upon. It's a very sensitive time for this whole topic. There's a business of medicine, which the fact that that medicine is a business isn't in and of itself less noble than medicine itself. It was already vilified, but this was a particularly ugly aspect of it. What I found was, in many cases, those folks had taken a very narrow definition of their job, which was, if they're supposed to be, say, a risk manager or a lawyer for a hospital, and their job is to protect their institution from harm, from fiscal ruin, to prepare it for potential lawsuits and the like. All jobs I understand and respect, and this is what modern society requires. But they'd taken this definition to such an extent that it actually, almost seemingly willfully, and I have to be careful with my words here, as it was in my writing, ignored the fact that they had a serial killer working amongst their staff, intentionally harming their patients, and rather than ever acknowledge that fact and therefore lose any sort of litigation, to say, I'm sorry, we have a serial killer in our midst, we must remove this person. We have a nurse who is at best incompetent, but at worst and most probably a sociopath and serial murderer. To admit that would be so devastating financially to any institution, to a hospital, that the protection of the institution became paramount. But the protection of the patients, the people that were actually being harmed, somehow fell away. So you have instances where Charlie Cullen is caught red-handed stashing drugs. They said stashing drugs. What he was doing is he was sticking. Remember, Charlie Cullen is kind of sort of a brat. You have to picture him as a bratty, frustrated guy. He's still mad at the hospitals, 20-something years on, and he's sort of throwing away some of their medicines just to waste their money and be rude, and he's having a bad time, with in his life at that point. So he thinks he's justified in that. He's also killing patients at the same time, which is a version to him of the same thing. And it's discovered that they're trash cans basically full of this stuff, including empty bottles of something called vecuronium bromide, or what they call VEC, which is a paralytic. It's very rarely used. It's used in very, very small doses. They find enough doses to kill the entire ward, and they find that those doses have been, if not used, they've been somehow loaded into a needle. It's the only way to get it out of the bottle, and put somewhere on the unit. Now, he did use it that very night, and he people died, and they knew it was suspicious. He's discovered. Outside counsel is brought in. Charlie Cullen is marched out of the unit with the nurses staring after being offered an option. He's offered the possibility of quitting or being fired. If he's fired, he doesn't get neutral references. He's got an employment problem. If he allows himself to quit or retire from that position, really the references are his call, and he can do what he will. He does that. He moves down the street to another hospital and starts killing patients. Another 18 patients, right down the street. The president of that hospital calls his colleagues and asks about this guy and passes on the information that this guy is a do not rehire at his hospital, but he doesn't call. Well, he doesn't call your hospital. He doesn't call your mother's hospital. He doesn't call your wife or daughter's hospital. He doesn't call anyone else but the people he knows. He warns some and not others. He makes it unofficial, and Charlie Cullen moves on. And that happens over and over and over again. And that story, which is not a story of a monster, sort of a pre-made monster doing monstrous things and then getting stopped. This isn't a Wolfman story or a Godzilla type story. It's a human story, And those people, by the way, in my book, whom I name by name, in The Good Nurse, I name everyone. That's the reason it took 8 years, is to make sure I actually got it right, and that that there was no way to go back on it. Unlike Charlie Cullen, who's going to be in jail for the rest of his natural life, and if not in New Jersey, then in Pennsylvania, where they'll kill him after he serves a couple hundred years in New Jersey. They're waiting for him there. Those folks actually got promoted. They're vice presidents now. They actually have an extra zero on the back of their salary, and they're still waiting. The detectives who finally caught these guys, and I know you touched on that, but the detectives were incredibly frustrated. The detectives were saying, these guys are accessories to murder. They actively interrupted our investigation in order to make sure that we wouldn't put it together in this exact way. And they asked for a grand jury, and that grand jury was denied. And the interesting thing about a grand jury, and the interesting thing about those charges, is that there's no statute of limitation. So that might still happen as more and more readers take this cause on. We're already seeing a call for that. So that's what's exciting about this book, is that it's not a cold case told. It's actually a story that kind of lives on, where readers actually become part of the ultimate answer. Because I think there's a monster. There are monsters in all of us, or perhaps I'm telling too much about myself. There's certainly one in me. I'm not going to do that. But it's a matter of choices. It's not a matter of just being good or bad. It's a matter of choosing to do that. And that story was much more interesting and much more important, I thought, to tell.
You talk about these hard-boiled detectives, Tim Braun and Danny Baldwin. So a couple guys that are teamed together to try to look at this case. And at first, and you really get into this, and this one of the books I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the whole book, but I really enjoyed this because the humanization of these two guys, these two tough, skeptical cops, been involved in murders, and now they're involved in some sleepy little Somerset here, and they're not sure if it's a murder. And so they go in very, very skeptical, thinking that this is going to be nothing, and then finally a fire is lit in both these guys. But briefly, tell us about the thing that really cracked this case was the phone call and that file that was there, and then the second part of that file where they talk about the digioxin. So tell us about that whole incident, because I think it's
absolutely.
Important.
Man, I fell in love with these guys. I thought I knew what the book was, and then I started spending time with these two former Newark homicide detectives, and I call them my salt and pepper detectives, one black, one white, both former linebackers. And both they'd seen everything, and all of a sudden the book was them, and it took me a while to recalibrate that, because they'd seen so much and they knew so much, but what they'd never seen, what they were used to was Newark, the tough streets of Newark, which was the murder capital of the world while they were there, where everything started with drugs and ended with a gun. And it was basically, there's a hole in somebody, and they have to figure out who put the hole in the guy. And it's always a physical thing that put the hole in the guy, and who was holding the physical thing that put the hole in the guy. That sounds a little reductive, but that's actually what it is. That's why they put the lines, the string. So, and it's not stupid. It's just that there's a basic element to that. This was chemical. You're talking about poisoning. You're talking about shifts. You're talking about all the chemistry and all that. And so these guys were lost. One of them told me, he said, all this Latin is Greek to us. Is how they put it. One of the ways they put it. So having said that, they assumed that. Okay, so as the hospital's having a problem, hospital doesn't say it's murder. They don't know exactly why they're there. They just know there's a problem. They assume the hospital's going to be their friend and tell them about this, because it's filled with people with degrees and so forth. So they're looking for a handhold on this, because we each have our field of expertise, and that's theirs. What they found was the opposite, that if they didn't get what they didn't ask for, and they didn't know what to ask for. They weren't being given any help. They didn't think they could catch this thing, and they had a sense, not too long after they started that this is a ticking bomb, because they were right. The serial killer was still working and still killing people the entire time they're investigating. So what are they going to do? And they catch a break. They figure out that from the paperwork that somebody called in that there was actually a call to New Jersey Poison Control, and they're really getting fed up with not getting straight talk. They don't really know how to talk to anybody about any of this stuff. They don't get it. There's a call to New Jersey Poison Control. They call into New Jersey Poison Control. They get the same sort of line. They actually go visit the guy finally who runs New Jersey Poison Control, and what they find is a kind of a surprising scene. A cranky guy at his desk, underfunded, who's been waiting for the cops to show up for 6 months because he got the call and knew that the Somerset Medical Center had a problem. He knew right away that the pattern that they were not trying to describe, but that somebody was required to call in and ask for help with the math. He knew that meant something. And when they showed up, he gave them finally. The lawyers said they had no paperwork. There's 6 months of work, and the lawyers, they don't have a single piece of paper. The hospital's saying a very similar thing. They've got 3 pieces of paper. Dr. Stephen Marcus at New Jersey Poison Control and Dr. Bruce Ruck, New Jersey Poison Control, are saying, we've got these calls, and by the way, we recorded them. And that's the only reason you got called is because we announced that we recorded them. And what those calls show is that there was a pattern, and that the hospitals knew and were trying to control this thing. And once they have that, you just see Tim Braun slapping his desk and saying, we can't. First of all, the people that we thought we were on the same side of, those are the guys we're against. Now we have to. Unfortunately, we have to treat everybody like an enemy, except maybe this guy. And I got those tapes. If we had more time, I'd play them for you. And they are unbelievable. You hear right away how frightened the pharmacy assistant that has to call in is. She knows just what's happening. And this, by the way, is while Charles Cullen is he's still got another, I would estimate probably 15 people that he kills after these calls are made. She knows there's something going on. She knows she's not supposed to say anything. She's under a lot of pressure. So this is this is a story of. This is a story of office politics as much as it is about serial murder, and it's amazing when those two things collide. So, it was beyond my imagination.
It seems too that there's the official, and then people that will work outside of that, like the people that informed on Charles that were suspicious, that went to administration and demanded right away early on. And still nothing was done. But at least later, when Braun looked at this, there was a record of these people, and it was documented. But also, when he looked for things, because he worked security. Again, one of the coincidences of this was that the same hospital that he did his security, that he started off as a security guy, was exactly the same hospital that Charles Cullen started at. And so he also knew how to go to. He also knew how to go to security and say, "Listen, I know I'm not supposed to get this information, but could you give me some information?" And so that
was so fascinating to me, because this is. This ended up being. I'm not from New Jersey. I don't really know New Jersey. This ended up being a story, but it could be anywhere. It ended up being a really local story. These two guys, detective and killer. When they got when the detective and the killer were in the same squad car, and this isn't even when the killer's getting arrested. This is at a preemptive moment when the detective is so desperate to try and take this guy down that he's just going to pick him up for essentially nothing, and he almost ruined the whole investigation by doing that. But you can understand his passion. They're talking about the school mascots. They're talking about their competing football teams at that point. Now, it's really jock versus nerd in that moment. It's detective versus serial killer. That dynamic in that small space, that really claustrophobic but small area. It may be the most prolific serial killer in American history, and the information I've got backs that up pretty solidly. But this was entirely personal. This was really, really, really small stuff in a way. It's always personal. I think when you do something like this, it's really all about some little hurt you've got. It's really not about the whole world. It's not. It has massive effects, but it's really just about some little part of you that got hurt, usually as a kid. You know.
Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have time to go into all this, and I don't want to give a lot of this book away, too, because a big portion of this is what you managed and you were capable of gathering from Charles Cullen, and that's really where the gold mine of information comes, is from the killer himself, from his own perspective. Not that they ever tell all of the truth, or if they... It's hard to know what exactly is truth, but some incredible truths you have dragged out of this person. So tell us just a little bit, without giving too much away, but tell us about how long this correspondence was, and just how you sort of managed to get some of this out. What was, if there is any technique that you employed, what did you have to employ to be able to get some information from this Charles Cullen?
Sure, absolutely. This was a tough one, because here you've got a guy who, let's just put it bluntly. Do you trust him? You know, you might want to hear his story because it's interesting, but do you trust it? And I was determined to write the true story. It wasn't a tell-all from Charles Cullen. It wasn't his story, and he was upset about that, I'm sure. But that was never in the cards. I use his words when his words are appropriate, but I never rely on his truth. He tips me off to his thinking. He tells me sort of where, metaphorically where the bodies are buried, but I never rely on him. That wouldn't work for anybody. Especially with something so important, because you also have people who are respected members of society, who are still respected members of society when this book comes out, and I wouldn't want to pit his truth against theirs when I'm in the middle of things legally, and also when the reader needs to know what's really happening. Having said that, first I just wanted to know his truth. I just wanted to know how he felt about things, and I wanted to know his story as he remembered it. And Charlie Cullen's a lot of things, but aside from that one story, I specifically laid out about how his priest led him to become a nurse, or how he accidentally became a nurse through correspondence. I've never found him to be a liar. He never outright lied, and I think that must be that's sort of an omission of memory, rather than which will happen with him all the time, of course, because in Charlie's mind he's a decent guy. He's not hating himself for doing this. He's not a proud egomaniacal character that wants to be boastful in any way, and he's not ashamed of his cleverness and outsmarting the system, and I know that there's a secret part of him, although he would never confess it publicly, that is very, very happy to be the most prolific serial killer in American history. And interestingly enough, he started his career only days after that record had been somehow, if you could put it that way, broken publicly by another nurse. But having said that, I had my own, so that's Charlie Cullen, and he's doing his thing. Meanwhile, there's me, and I consider myself to be a moral person as well, and I had my own problem, which is to say, and I think every journalist that attempts to talk to a source who did terrible things has this problem, which is to say how do you not be false? How do you not misrepresent yourself? How do you not betray somebody, because I don't want to betray anybody, including a serial killer. I didn't befriend him. We were never friends. It was always very clear right from my first letter that I was not his ethical accountant. As I said, I was not here to somehow balance karmic points or the like. At the same time, I also made clear, because he didn't want to talk about the bad stuff. Never wanted to talk about the bad stuff. We did not talk about murder. It will surprise you to hear that, because this is a murderer. But murder was the one thing you don't. First of all, you'd never say the word. Second of all, he'd never talk about it. And if you did, he'd shut down. And I don't mean shut down like I don't feel like talking. I mean shut down like you'd watch a robot start shutting down. That wasn't a part of he was. That wasn't something he was his full psyche was equipped to actually deal with. I don't know that he was a split personality in that sense, but he certainly acted like one. And that was the end of the discussion. And meanwhile, I'd be traveling 7 hours at a stretch to get to him, and I'd say the wrong word, and I'd watch the whole. It's like I'd flipped a switch. So I wanted to understand as much as I could, and then go follow up on that. So what is it you do learn? You learn about, first of all, you do a lot of listening and a lot of probing. There's some things he wants to talk about, and they're very boring, like sitting next to someone on a bus that's really obsessed with some nice thing that happened to them. He was that guy sometimes. But sometimes he'd talk obsessively about things that you knew, that you'd understand were enormously important, and you realize were actually the coda to everything. And that was actually children. That was children in the burn unit. And the way the children that came in when he was first starting as a nurse would come in sort of like, almost like, I'd say like baked potatoes, but in that they're with a hard jacket of scar, and that they could never grow again unless you cut them. And it was terrible to cut them, but you'd have to cut them, and you'd have to put them in these terrible sort of wetsuit-like garments called pressure suits, and to squeeze them, and without any of that, they would be stuck in this sort of cocoon of childhood, this cocoon of trauma. And he didn't put it in those terms, by any means, but it was very clear to me right away that was Charlie Cullen. That was him. He was that kid. He recognized those kids. He talked about how he wanted to help them, how he wanted to treat them, how sad he was. And we'd be talking about anything, and we might end up back at that topic at any given time, at any given year. When I saw him in jail, when I had to buzz through 10 layers of security and pat downs, across the scarred plexiglass of the non-com nighttime visitor center in Trenton Maximum Security. It didn't matter when it was. That was always on his mind. It never left him, how those kids had suffered. And somehow how those kids had suffered, their little burns, reminded him of himself. They reminded him of how he'd been burned in the Navy. They reminded him of little problems he'd had as a child. It was all tickling backwards, always, over and over and over again. And I wanted to make sure he knew I wasn't his friend, but I was listening, and he knew that. He understood that. I think Charlie Cullen needs to. Well, actually, I can say this with great certainty. After 8 years of dealing with him, Charlie Cullen needs to feel like a victim, or needs to certainly seem like a victim in his own mind, no matter what it is. He's a victim of his mother disappearing. He's a victim of whatever system. He's a victim of staffing irregularities at whatever hospital, or a victim of his divorce, or whatever might be happening. And he's certainly going to be a victim of this writer. I'm aware of that, and I was aware of that going in. But the truth is, he's very much in control of what he's not he's not fully aware of what he's saying, but he's very much aware of the fact that he's expressing a version of his self-image that he's proud of, and that version is shy. That version is controlled. That version is contrite. That version is the good nurse. And that guy is real. That guy is real, and that guy exists for Charlie Cullen. But the truth at the same time is that there's another guy living inside of Charlie Cullen that Charlie Cullen can't acknowledge, and that guy is the guy you've got to eventually talk to. And it doesn't just come out like some weird voice or something like in the movies. You just have to eventually wait for the information to percolate down to that other guy, for those two people to have a little bit of a negotiation. the outside shy, self-deprecating guy that lived with his mom and didn't want to get beaten up or sodomized or anything else, and the guy that secretly is making clippings of the fact that they're onto the fact that maybe there's a killer nurse in New Jersey. And when those two guys have a proper negotiation, that's when you can actually speak. But he'll never speak straight. He won't lie. He just won't. There are just some things he won't be able to tell you. So, for instance, when he tells, if you ever see his confession, I've seen his full confession tapes, the video, and if you see that full confession, at first he seems sort of defeated in some way, and then he perches up like a cat, and then he sings a song. He starts in the present tense, and he goes backwards for 6 hours with things that you would not remember off the top of your head for 6 hours in a manner that makes it very clear that he had an hour commute each way every day for a long time. Makes it very clear that he'd been singing this song to himself for a very long time, and that he always knew exactly what he did. And I would suspect very strongly, in fact, I would bet anything that there is a long roll of butcher paper somewhere in this world that has the name of every victim he was ever responsible for, written out in chronological order, and it with great accuracy somewhere out there. And I know but he knows it'll come out. It'll come out later. So trying to deal with Charlie, I mean, you're both playing a game, and that hurt me too because I consider myself a good guy. And unfortunately, one of the things that you're supposed to do sometimes as a journalist, what they want you to do is trick someone to get the story, and I won't do that. So luckily, we had the kidney between us. When he was first trying to donate that kidney. Yeah. And that's what we ended up. I ended up focusing on. So he pretends he's mad at me now. He won't speak to me. And I absolutely know that he's consciously upset with me and unconsciously probably very pleased, and that bothers me a lot, frankly.
So he's angry at you regarding what? I know he'd be happy about the limelight that that's happening one way or another, bad guy or good guy. But why is he angry at you? For betrayal?
It's funny. I mean, it's almost the opposite. I mean, the persona that Cullen gives is one of a guy that doesn't want to be bothered, doesn't want to talk about this. It was all quiet. It was all mercy killing, and he used to call what I was doing, basically promoting people to crane their necks at a car wreck. He also faulted, of course, the hypocrisy of one of the hospitals he worked at, St. Luke's Hospital, which he considered to be a Catholic hospital, as he was raised Catholic. His takeaway, where he'd killed numerous people at St. Luke's, and they were the hospital that actually moved him on, having caught him in the middle of the night. and never mentioned it. He said the hypocrisy of that, a Catholic hospital of all places. Again, he always has to find some way to find a higher ground, if you will.
Sure.
And and someone else to blame. So for this, the only reason I know he's happy with this, and again, actually, this is a supposition. So I would never put that he's happy in this in the book, for instance. Is that when he meets at the very end with a confidential informant, he happens to he's clipped out of the paper some pieces that suggest that there's somebody has been killing people at these hospitals. It's not certain whom yet, and the pride that he has in that one fact, the fact that he actually collected that, is one of the few indicators that I have of exactly who he is in that regard. But he's furious with me, and he's certainly not happy at all the way I painted him.
Oh, sure. One question I have for you before we conclude this interview is, and I just thought it was important, so I'll ask you, how important do you think it was? And first off, I want to ask where you got this bit of information, where you paint a very vivid scene in the Navy where he is humiliated. So I want you to tell us about that scene, and then I want to ask you where you got that information, and was it from Charles himself, and all that information from his perspective, and how important do you think that was in his murderous spree?
Oh, right. That's a great question. That was in some ways it's a relatively short book. Considering how long it started out as, so I had to pick my spots. The humiliation within the Navy, a lot of that came from Charlie himself, and that was, and so the actual scenes of Charlie being humiliated in the Navy as a first person or as an empirical account are pretty limited because that was hard to verify. I found that the Navy sources that I looked into were I couldn't get second-party verification. The New York Times published some things. A number of places published accounts. There were people that, for example, the newspapers at the time were publishing accounts of Charles Cullen being found at the one said at the nuclear controls with a in surgical scrubs and a mask. Another said that he was just goofing around in the same gear. Other guys had other stories. I didn't find any of those to be. It's not that they weren't credible. It's just that I couldn't really verify them with multiple sources. So, in terms of the humiliation, what I had to do is take single source humiliation, sourcing and stories, and combine that with Charlie Cullen's own recollection, which doesn't amount to double sourcing, but turn that into his recollection, because that was certainly his sensibility. I wouldn't want to present that as straight history. Anyone that I found that ever served with him in the Navy said he was. They called him fish belly. He was mistreated. He was always treated like a new guy, and his sort of gym locker sensibility about what it is to live in a submarine. Now, partially, I knew that when he was talking about that, he was speaking to me. Because the truth is that anyone that's chosen at this point in life, or to be a writer, and probably was a writer for the last 30 years, very, very probably has a lot more in common with a guy that's going to speak like that than someone that right away knew that they were going to go into being, say, a beat cop or something like that. It's really rare and interesting when you find that combination. I love crime and true crime because I love that combination, and I really want to, that's where I live. But I know that's what Charlie was trying to play is that middle ground, and his memory of cruelty, I had to tone down massively because, of course, remember in every story he's a victim. In the last one of the last hospitals he was in, his great memory was of how the other nurses, they were male nurses at this point, because remember we started with female nurses. We started in a world where nursing was almost entirely female, and then largely because the salary shifted, and it largely became, it started to get an increasingly male component. He became increasingly uncomfortable, and he didn't enjoy that dynamic, and his ability to wield power really changed. And when that happened, he felt like he felt like he was being victimized. I think even when he wasn't, frankly, he was. The patients were perhaps being treated with a gallows humor he didn't respect, but again, that was an aspect of perspective that he brought to this uniquely. So that's something that I had to treat very, very carefully.
It just seems that, and he's not the only guy. The person that I experienced and all the research that I have too is that killers always point to somebody else, point out their weaknesses and their foibles and their, the injustice of their court case, the ineffectiveness of their counsel. That's why they end up representing themselves or wanting to represent themselves. So it's always these people, everybody, their wives, their family, have treated them badly, and so I don't find that so unusual. I would say that how affected were you from this entire experience? Was there any depression, or was there any real serious outcome from having lived through this pretty tragic tale?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, I didn't. The tragic aspect didn't hit me. I know it should have. My first interaction with Charlie was with a guy who, kind of, waved to me, "Hey," across the. Across the plate glass or across the plexiglass, and I waved back, and he said, essentially he said, this is kind of a weird situation, and I said, yeah, it is, because it was weird for me, and maybe he's obviously playing me there, but I also knew it was true, and I didn't like him. I knew what he'd done, but I felt like I could talk to the guy. My later interaction came when I started going to court, and the victims' families, who had been dealing with this for a lot longer and had a very, very different reality and frankly, I think a more realistic take on this. They were angry, and they were and it was ugly. It was really ugly, and I found it really unpleasant. And I got deeper and deeper. These are just the first few months. I got deeper and deeper. Started going in with the detectives in a couple of years. Started really getting into. I started writing from Charlie Cullen's perspective. That's what really did it. Because what I realized at a certain point is, it wasn't an intellectual decision. It was just the truth of it. I wasn't writing from his voice. It wasn't I did this, I did that. But at the same time, I wanted to give a sense of who he was without being, overly dramatic about it, but at least to allow people to understand what it is, at least to be a nurse. Let's start there. So, you're a nurse in a burn unit. You have something called the rule of nines, where you know that someone burned over X percentage of their body times 9. That's the percentage that they're plus the age. That's the percentage that they're going to die. So that the majority of people that come into your unit in these terrible situations, you're doing everything you can. They're in terrible pain. You're taking extraordinary measures, and they're going to die. So I want most people never have to face that. I lived for a very short time in that reality for this. I actually started shadowing night nurses in burn units, and it was heartbreaking and very difficult. But I wanted that sort of first person perspective and that choice making. What do you do? But then ultimately, if you're going to be a serial killer, there's a very different choice pattern that happens. Every time you meet someone, there's a different drop-down menu. Let's just take it from a sort of a computer perspective, and the drop-down menu isn't sort of greet them, shun them, ignore them, court them, and the like. It also includes kill them, because it was very casual for Charlie. It didn't really mean to him what it meant maybe to a lot of people. And interestingly enough, I think that's what we ask of our soldiers as well. So, and the fact is, it's not a casual drop-down menu.
No.
So to suggest it is a casual drop-down menu and then treat it like it's not, which we might do with soldiers returning home, is to really miss it. So I took it upon myself to put that drop-down menu in my own head, and that actually did screw me up for a while. So I had bail posted pretty regularly on a just in case, just so I knew that at any given moment I could go over any line.
Wow.
And I walked around for a while with that sensibility, and just to see what that was like. And I say for a while, I mean for a couple of years, probably. Actually, now that I look back on it, and it actually, truth be told, I think it messed me up. It was hard. I mean, I'm glad I went through it, and a lot of people, and anyone listening to this that actually went to war, did any of that stuff. I did not. So screw me. So you're absolutely right. But that was I did my best with that, and it was tough. I mean, for me, and I think for my relationships and for all that. But it was, I think, very good for my understanding of that. Because it's really about, honestly, it's think about. I mean, think about how crazy that is to have shake hands, kill this person as being one of the options. I mean, it's sort of a video game option, for every interaction. And yet, this is exactly the reality for this guy. To make that casual and to sort of treat that as a casual thing for the book was good, and I'm glad. But I'm hoping I've gotten out of that. I guess I'd say. But yeah, I think I'll put it this way. At the very end, when I was really when I knew too much, and really I just needed to make the book happen. I just, because ultimately what happens to a lot of people that know that research something this long is you want to make a book that's 10,000 words or 2 million words long. You want, sure. It's a life. It's lives. It's the victims' lives. You want to do everything for this thing, and you realize, ultimately it needs to fit between two covers, and it needs to fit into a pocket, and you just need to get out the door, and you need to go out, at some point. So, right about when that was happening, and I was thinking, what to choose? Everybody's important. All these thoughts are important. All these victims are important. How do you? The Japanese tsunami happened, and tens of thousands of people died, and it was horrific. And I went as a journalist and went right into the middle of it and lived, with my camping gear, blew my back out carrying all my stuff, and lived in the middle of it with some remarkable people, and just completely wiped out almost all of those thoughts I just described to you, in a way. I mean, it was the same sort of thing. Like it was a survival mentality, but it was. I got the sort of small cyclical evil part of it out of my head, and I came and I quickly wrote that story, and then I came back and just like took the book and finished it, and that was really, really important. It was really, really vital that I had that aspect of it. So yeah, I find it devastating, but ideally it's therapeutic, and I have a hope for it in the end, which is actually still happening, because it looks like it's a movie now, which is not by the way what I was going for. But to the extent that there's a social message, right? The social message, by the way, isn't don't kill innocent people. The social message is more Nuremberg, frankly, than that. It's don't think you can make a salary.
Don't go to the hospital.
Right. Well, there's that, but don't think you can make a salary, guarding the concentration camp and not get called on it, and that's what there are a lot of people that have done that, and that I think might still come out. My great hope now is that that there will be that grand jury, and those detectives are still waiting for it, and right now. Lionsgate and there's a director. I'm hoping they're going to announce it soon. Well, but you'll know who I'm talking about. Are actually taking this on as a social cause, and I'm hoping they, frankly, screw those admins the way they, at least as badly as Charlie got done.
Yeah, I mean that's really what I saw from this book too, is that if you could see this in a movie, would be the Aaron Brockovich again, somebody trying to fight a Goliath, in terms of these two cops looking at this and other people and victims' families, surviving family members of victims like this, and seeing that the administration looks more at the bottom line, covering up their own reputation, looking at the charity that's given to them, and that's the way they're looking at it completely. And it really does turn into a cover-up when you have a lawyer, not even, as Braun said, the guy didn't even take any notes. He says, I wanted to punch the guy in the face. Right. I want to thank you very much, Charles, for coming on and talking about The Good Nurse, a true story of medicine, madness, and murder. For those that might want to contact you, continue this conversation, or Facebook, give us how people might contact you if they're so inclined.
Oh, well, I'm Charles Graeber that's a AEBER .com, and that's got all sorts of contact information in there. But you can always find me, and I always write back. And I really appreciate the fact that this book's resonated, especially with nurses in this country. There are 3 million of them, and honestly, if they all stood up for this, we'd get a grand jury, and you'd get those guys would be in jail. So let me know.
Yeah, it absolutely tarnishes all the great work that nurses and doctors do, but just looking at the profession of nursing itself, all the great dedicated people, and something like this is just a black mark on the entire industry itself. So, yeah, I would see them definitely standing behind something like this and rallying for the rights of these people that they profess to take care of each and every day. So I want to thank you very much, Charles, for coming on and talking about The Good Nurse, and you have yourself a great evening, and hope to talk to you again in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. You're a great interviewer. That's wonderful.
Thank you very much, Charles. Good night.
Good night.